Silence has a sound. You don't believe me, but it does. It's not the absence of noise. It's a presence. It's the pressure in your ears, the thumping of your own blood, the faint, high-frequency hum of your own nervous system firing in the dark. I've spent more of my life in silence than most, deep in the belly of the earth, where the world's clamor is a forgotten dream. But I never truly understood silence, not its true weight, not its teeth, until the abyssal maw. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I am, or was, a geologist and a speleologist. I led the Tartarus expedition. There were 5 of us, a team hand-picked from the best in the world. We weren't just adventurers. We were scientists, cartographers, and pioneers charting the last true frontier on this planet. Our goal was simple, audacious: to descend into the abyssal maw in the Caucasus Mountains and officially become the deepest human beings in history. The cave was a legend, a vertical labyrinth that had swallowed expeditions whole. We believed we were different. We were better equipped, better trained, better funded. We were, in our hubris, invincible. The first week was a testament to that hubris. It was a symphony of practiced efficiency. Jax, our lead climber and safety officer, was a mountain of a man with a laconic wit and hands as steady as the ancient rock we descended past. He moved with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful to watch. His voice a low rumble over the comms. Anchors set, Aris. You're clear for the next pitch. Don't scrape my ropes, you academic. Lena was our tech wizard. She was small and wary, her eyes always scanning the array of sensors and communication relays that were our umbilical cord to the surface. She mapped every inch of the cave in real time with a custom-built letter drone she called Orpheus. Signal integrity is at 994%. She'd chirp, your voice a welcome spark of life in the crushing dark. Surface Camp says hello and wants to know if you've found any mole people yet. Then there was Ben, our biologist and medic. He was the quiet soul of the team, his gaze fixed on the glistening cave walls, searching for the telltale signs of extremophiles, life in its most resilient and alien forms. He carried a sense of wonder that was infectious, and a mech-kit that was thankfully, for a time, untouched. Look at this, he'd whisper, pointing a gloved finger at a patch of phosphorescent fungi. It's a whole ecosystem powered by chemosynthesis, absolutely breathtaking. And, finally, Marco, the youngest, the protégé. He was Jax's apprentice, a phenomenal caver with an unquenchable fire of enthusiasm. He was strong, fast, and saw this expedition as his chance to step into legend. He was the future, and he was a constant reminder of the passion that drove us all into this beautiful, unforgiving darkness. For 12 days, we descended. We passed through sections with names that spoke of the cavers who came before us. The Grinder, a tight squeeze that scraped the gear on our backs. The Black Cathedral, a chamber so vast our headlamps couldn't find the ceiling. Letha's River, a frigid, fast-flowing underground stream we had to cross on a Tyrolean traverse. Each day was a grueling series of rappels, climbs, and crawls. but our spirits were high. We were a well-oiled machine, our comms filled with professional chatter, jokes, and Ben's occasional scientific marveling. We were pushing the boundary of the known world. On day 13, we reached the sump at the previously recorded bottom, 12 meters below the surface. This was the end of the line for every expedition before us. A deep, impassable pool of water. But our ground-penetrating radar, Lena's pride and joy, had shown an anomaly. A void beyond the rock wall, just to the side of the sump. It's there, Eris. I'm telling you. Lena said, her voice crackling with static and excitement. The density shift is massive. It's not a passage, it's a room. A big one. This was the moment. Our secondary objective. Jax, ever the pragmatist, was skeptical. Could be a geological fault. Lena, a pocket of gas. We start blasting rock down here. We could bring the whole mountain down on our heads. It's a controlled charge. Jax, I countered, my own heart hammering with anticipation. Just enough to fracture the thinnest section. We've done the math. It's safe. The debate was short. The allure of the unknown was too strong. We set the microcharge. We retreated to a safe distance, huddled behind a rock formation. The countdown echoed in our helmets. 3, 2, 1. The sound was shockingly loud in the confined space. Not a boom, but a deep, resonant sarske that vibrated through the soles of our boots and deep into our bones. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for millennia. A cloud of dust billowed out. When it settled, a dark, jagged opening, no bigger than a manhole, had appeared in the wall. A breeze, cool and smelling of ancient dust and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood, drifted out. Marco, ever eager, was the first to the edge. Whoa, I can't see the bottom. I don't think my headlamp can reach it. We had done it. We had breached the known world. The excitement was electric, a tangible thing in the cold air. We set new anchors, checked our gear one last time. This was it. The true descent began now. I was the first one down. The rope spooled through my descender with a reassuring hum. The darkness below was absolute. A perfect void that swallowed the beam of my helmet-mounted light. Meters turned into tens of meters. The jagged hole above shrank to a distant star. Then, after a rappel that felt impossibly long, my feet touched solid ground. I unclipped and swept my light around. The breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I could only key the comms twice. Our prearranged signal, for you have to see this. One by one, they descended, each one falling silent as their lights joined mine. We were standing on a wide, perfectly level plaza of polished black basalt. We weren't in a cavern. We were in a city. Stretching out before us, lost in a darkness that seemed to defy our lights, were structures. Massive, cyclopean buildings carved not from individual blocks, but seemingly sculpted from the living rock of the cavern itself. There were no arches, no windows, no doors. Just monolithic shapes that soared up into the oppressive black. Their surfaces covered in intricate geometric carvings unlike anything I had ever seen. They weren't human. The angles were wrong. The aesthetic was utterly alien. It was a city built by and for something that did not share our sense of space or logic. A faint, ethereal, blue-green light pulsed from veins of what looked like glowing minerals embedded in the architecture, casting long, distorted shadows that danced at the edge of our vision. The cavern itself was colossal, larger than any stadium on Earth. The air was still and cold, and the silence was different here. It was profound, heavy. It felt like a held breath. "My God," Ben whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "This is impossible. This predates humanity. It has to." I was already moving, my mind racing. "Lena, get Orpheus in the air. I want a full 3D map. Jax, Marco, fan out, perimeter check. Non-invasive? Gentlemen. We touch nothing until we know what we're dealing with." Lee, for hours, we were like children in a forbidden museum. Lena's drone whirred softly, its lights a tiny firefly mapping an impossible landscape. The city, which I mentally named Xylos, was a dead, silent masterpiece. We found wide boulevards, towering spires that scraped the unseen ceiling, and amphitheaters built for audiences of giants. But there were no artifacts, no tools, no bones, just the silent, monolithic stone. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished into thin air millions of years ago. The discovery was intoxicating. We were ecstatic, our comms alive with breathless speculation. This was more than a record. This was the single greatest discovery in human history. We had found a non-human civilization, a true lost world, miles beneath the Earth's surface. The transition from wonder to terror was so swift, so absolute, that my mind still struggles to process it. It started with a sound, a simple, stupid sound. Marco, excited, was jogging back from the edge of a wide plaza to report to Jax. He stumbled. His metal water canteen, clipped to his belt, came loose. It hit the basalt floor with a series of loud, percussive clangs that echoed through the vast, silent city. Clang, 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 clatter. The echoes seemed to go on forever, each one a hammer blow against the ancient silence. For a moment, we all froze, wincing at the profane noise in this sacred place. Jax's voice was a low growl. "Marco, watch your step! Keep it quiet." "Sorry, Jax," Marco said, his voice sheepish as he retrieved the canteen. And then, a new sound answered. It came from the darkness at the edge of our lights. A soft, wet, clicking noise. It was joined by another, and another, from all around us. It was the sound of 1,000 long fingernails tapping on wet stone. "What was that?" Lena asked, her voice tight. "Wildlife." Ben raised his hand. "She." "Listen." The clicking grew closer. It was accompanied by a low, guttural chittering. And then we saw them. They emerged from the shadows of the monolithic buildings. You from crevices in the rock we hadn't noticed, from the deep, impenetrable blackness above. They were humanoid in shape, but horrifically wrong. Their skin was a pale, translucent white, like the belly of a fish, and seemed to weep a thin, slick fluid. Their limbs were too long, their joints bending at unnatural angles. They had no eyes, just smooth, stretched skin over empty sockets. but their heads were dominated by huge, membranous, fan-like ears that flared and twitched, constantly sampling the air. They walked in a low crouch, their long, clawed fingers and toes gripping the basalt floor, and they were all turning their eyeless faces towards us, towards the source of the sound. "Aris!" Jax's voice was dangerously calm. "Get back to the ropes. Now." But it was too late. One of them, closer than the rest, let out a high-pitched shriek, a sound like tearing metal that lanced through our helmets. And they charged. They didn't run. They flowed. They moved with a terrifying, silent speed, their long limbs eating up the distance. The only sound was the soft, wet slap of their feet on the stone. Marco was closest. He didn't even have time to scream. A pale shape launched itself from the shadows. Long, obsidian-like claws flashed in the beam of his headlamp. The light spun wildly, painting a frantic, sickening arc across the cavern wall before crashing to the ground and extinguishing. His calm channel was a brief burst of static, a wet, tearing sound, and then silence. Chaos erupted. We opened fire. Jax and I were armed with high-caliber pistols for subterranean defense. Cave bears, paranoid delusions, that sort of thing. The roar of the guns was deafening in the cavern, each shot a thunderclap that seemed to drive the creatures into a greater frenzy. The bullets hit them, tearing through their pale flesh, but they barely seemed to notice. More and more of them poured from the darkness, a silent, swarming tide of white. "The ropes! Get to the ropes!" I yelled, firing into the swarming mass. We scrambled back towards our descent point. A creature lunged at Lena. Jax shoved her out of the way, emptying his clip into its chest at point-blank range. It staggered, then fell, but two more took its place. I saw one of them scuttling up the sheer wall of a nearby monolith with the speed of a spider, its eyeless face turning towards the sound of our panicked shouts. They hunted by sound. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Our gunshots, our screams. We were ringing the dinner bell. We reached the base of the rappel line. Ben was already there, trying to clip in, his hands shaking. "They're coming from above!" he screamed. I looked up. Silhouettes were descending our ropes from the jagged hole far above. They had been clinging to the cavern ceiling, dormant, until our noise had woken them. And in my horror, I saw one of them, then another, pause on the rope and begin to saw at it with its claws. "They're cutting the ropes!" Lena shrieked, her voice a high wire of panic. Jax was already climbing, free climbing the first few meters with desperate speed. "Get on the line! Move!" But then, with a sickening snap, the main line went slack. The backup line followed a second later. The severed ends whipped down into the darkness, useless. The soft hum of our comms link to the surface died, replaced by a flat, dead hiss. They had cut us off. They had cut everything. We were trapped. The last thing I saw before we plunged into a desperate retreat was Jax, dangling 20 meters up, dropping his useless pistol and pulling out his climbing axe, swinging it at the pale forms swarming down towards him. We ran. We ran blindly, away from the ropes, away from the light of our fallen comrade, deeper into the alien city. The sounds of the creatures, the wet clicking, the shrieks, the soft slap of their feet pursued us. We ducked behind a massive pylon, our backs pressed against the cold, carved stone. There were 4 of us now. Ben was hyperventilating, Lena was sobbing quietly, and I could hear the ragged, desperate breaths of Jax, who had somehow managed to drop back down and join our retreat. Everyone, I gasped, fighting to control my own panic. Shut up. Absolute silence. Now, the message passed between us through terrified eyes. Be quiet. Don't make a sound. Slowly, agonizingly, the sounds of pursuit faded. The creatures, without a noise to guide them, had lost us. We were huddled together in the oppressive dark, lit only by the narrow beams of our headlamps, which we now kept pointed at the floor. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was not empty. It was full of menace. It was listening. We stayed there for what felt like an eternity, 4 statues of terror. Every frantic heartbeat, every shaky breath felt like a shout in the stillness. A small pebble, dislodged by my boot, scraped against the floor. The sound was like a gunshot. We all froze, listening. Far off, we heard an answering chitter. They were still out there, hunting. Jax was the first to regain some semblance of composure. He moved with infinite slowness, bringing his head close to mine. He didn't speak. He used hand signals, the kind used by special forces. Simple, direct. Report status. Plan. I looked at the others. Lena had her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Ben was pale, a dark stain spreading on his arm where a claw had grazed him. He was trying to apply pressure to it without a sound. I looked at Jax and shook my head slowly. No plan. His jaw tightened. He pointed up, then made a cutting motion. Ropes gone. Then he pointed to his comms unit and shook his head. All comms dead. He tapped his headlamp. Limited battery. The reality of our situation crashed down on me with a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. We were more than 2 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. We were in an unmapped, hostile environment. We had no way to ascend, no way to call for help. We were being hunted by creatures that were perfectly adapted to this world of absolute darkness and silence. Our strengths, our technology, our voices, our very ability to cooperate were now our greatest liabilities. Every word spoken, every piece of gear that clicked or scraped was a potential death sentence. Our survival now depended on one thing: our ability to become ghosts. Over the next few hours, a new language was born between us, a language of slow, deliberate gestures, of eye contact, of shared, silent understanding. We had to move. Staying put was a slow death as our batteries and supplies dwindled. Our only hope was to find another way up, a natural passage, an ancient ventilation shaft in this impossible city, anything that led towards the surface. Jax took the lead. His pragmatism was now our most valuable asset. He carefully, silently, unclipped a soft pouch from his belt and distributed high-energy, nutrient paste. We ate in agonizing silence, the small sucking sounds of the tubes seeming to echo in our ears. Then, he pointed, away from the central plaza, towards a darker, narrower section of the city, where the monolithic buildings were packed more closely together. It was our only option, to go deeper in the hopes of finding a way out. Our first steps were a lesson in terror. We had to relearn how to walk. Each foot had to be placed with surgical precision. Heel first, then slowly rolling onto the sole to avoid scuffing. Our gear, once a source of security, was now a collection of noise-making hazards. Every buckle, every zipper, every carabiner was a potential traitor. We moved in a tight formation. UR headlamps dimmed to their lowest setting, casting just enough light to see the ground a few feet in front of us. The city was even more daunting up close. The carvings on the walls seemed to writhe in the low light. They weren't decorative. They depicted the creatures. The listeners, I started to call them in my mind, in 1,000 different poses, hunting, swarming, and in several disturbing murals, appearing to be worshipped by some other, smaller, stooped figures we had not seen. This wasn't just their hunting ground. This was their world. We were the intruders. A drip of water from the cavern ceiling far above struck the basalt floor ahead of us. Plink. Instantly, from the darkness to our right, came a soft, questioning chitter. We froze. Our bodies rigid. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't dare breathe. The chittering was answered by another, closer this time. A pale, elongated shape detached itself from the shadows of a building about 50 meters away. It stood perfectly still, its huge, fan-like ears rotating, scanning, tasting the silence for the echo of that single drop of water. Its eyeless face was a mask of pure, predatory attention. We stood like statues for a full 5 minutes, sweat trickling down our backs, muscles screaming in protest. The listener, seemingly satisfied that the sound was a natural occurrence, eventually relaxed. Its earfins drooping slightly, it turned and melted back into the shadows. We let out a collective, silent breath. The lesson was learned. The slightest, most insignificant sound could draw them. Our journey became a nightmare crawl. We communicated with hand signals. Stop, go, danger, listen. Jax would scout ahead a few feet, then signal for us to follow. We moved through impossibly large boulevards and down narrow alleyways where the silent buildings seemed to press in on us. The faint, blue-green bioluminescence from the walls was our only constant light source, a ghostly glow that made everything feel unreal. Ben was struggling. His arm was bleeding sluggishly, and his face was drawn with pain. At one point, he stumbled, catching himself before he could fall. But his pack, heavy with scientific equipment, shifted, its frame groaning softly. It was enough. From a narrow gap between two monoliths, a listener shot out. It moved so fast it was just a pale blur. It wasn't aiming for Ben, but for the source of the sound, his pack. Jax reacted with instinct born of 1,000 dangerous situations. He didn't shout. He didn't make a sound. He simply shoved Ben hard, pushing him to the ground, while simultaneously swinging his climbing axe in a silent, deadly arc. The heavy pick of the axe embedded itself in the creature's skull with a sickening, wet crunch. The listener spasmed, its long claws scrabbling at the stone, and then lay still. There was no shriek, no death cry. Just the horrid, final sound of its life being extinguished. But the damage was done. The sound of the impact, though brief, had echoed. From all around us, a chorus of chittering began, closer and more agitated than before. They were converging. Jax didn't hesitate. He pointed to a low, dark opening at the base of one of the larger structures. It looked like a storm drain, or perhaps a service tunnel. It was our only hope of breaking line of sight. We scrambled for it, our silent discipline shattering into a desperate, clumsy haste. Lena slipped, her knee hitting the ground with a soft thud. Ben stifled a cry of pain as his injured arm scraped against the rock. Each sound was another beacon to our hunters. We piled into the tunnel, a low, narrow passage that stank of ozone and decay. Jax was the last one in, pulling a loose slab of carved stone over the entrance. It wasn't a perfect seal, but it plunged us into absolute, claustrophobic darkness and, hopefully, muffled our sounds. We pressed ourselves against the tunnel walls, not daring to move, as the chittering and the soft, slapping footsteps of the listeners passed by our hiding spot. We could hear them sniffing at the entrance, hear their claws scraping against the stone we'd used as a door. It was the sound of rats scratching at the other side of a wall, but these rats were 6 feet tall and armed with razors. Time ceased to have meaning in that tunnel. We were adrift in a sensory deprivation, tank filled with our own terror. We had to turn off our headlamps to conserve what little power we had left. The darkness was total. It pressed in on my eyes, making them ache. All I had was the feeling of the cold, slimy wall at my back, the faint warmth of Lena huddled next to me, and the sound of my own ragged, desperate breathing, which I tried to muffle in the crook of my arm. In the dark, my mind began to play tricks on me. I saw Marco's headlamp spinning in the darkness. I heard the snap of the ropes. I felt a phantom touch on my shoulder and had to bite my own hand to keep from crying out. After what could have been an hour or a day, the sounds outside faded. Jax, with infinite care, risked a peek. He signaled the all clear. We were safe for now. He switched his headlamp back on, its beam cutting a stark white cone through the black, and we saw what kind of tunnel we had sheltered in. The walls were not smooth. They were covered in deep, vertical gouges, like something had been sharpening its claws on them for centuries. And the floor was littered with bones. They were not human. They were from some other creature, smaller, more slender, with skulls that were crushed and rib cages that were shattered. This was a larder, a slaughterhouse. We had to keep moving. The tunnel sloped downwards, and we had no choice but to follow it. Our silent procession continued, a slow, grim march into the depths. We were a different team now. The scientists, the pioneers, were gone. We were just prey, trying to outwit the predators. The tunnel eventually opened into a different kind of space. It was a natural cavern, not one of the carved cityscapes. It was vast and humid, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and wet earth. A large, still lake of black water dominated the center of the cavern, and the only way forward was a narrow, treacherous-looking ledge that skirted its edge. "Batteries," Lena whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The first word spoken by any of us in what felt like a lifetime. Her voice sounded alien, fragile. "Mine is at 15%. Jack's 19. He breathed back. 12. Ben added, his voice strained with pain. I checked my own. 21. We have to use them sparingly, one light at a time. We agreed. Jack's, being in the lead, would use his light. The rest of us would follow in his shadow. The plan was sound, but it meant 3 of us were walking in near total darkness, our hands trailing along the damp cavern wall for guidance. The ledge was slick with algae. We moved at a snail's pace, each footstep a calculated risk. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from the stalactites high above, each one landing in the lake with a soft plop that made my heart leap into my throat. Halfway across, Ben faltered. He was weak from blood loss, his movements becoming unsteady. He leaned heavily against the wall, his breath coming in ragged, audible gasps. "Ben," I whispered, moving close to him. "You have to keep it quiet."
"Count Aris,"
he panted, his body trembling. My arm. "I think it's infected. I feel cold." Suddenly, from the center of the black lake, a single, large bubble broke the surface. Then another. Something had been disturbed by the sound of Ben's breathing. Jack's, at the front, froze. He swept his headlamp beam across the surface of the water. At first, there was nothing. Then, a pale shape rose from the depths. It was a listener, but different, larger. Its skin was bloated and semi-translucent, and long, weed-like filaments drifted from its body. It must have been one that lived in the water, a different variant. Its eyeless face broke the surface, its fan-like ears spreading wide, cupping the air, listening. It had heard Ben. It began to swim towards the ledge, its movements creating a soft, rippling sound in the water. It was a sound that would cover our own. Jack saw the opportunity in the same instant I did. He turned, his eyes locking with mine in the dim light. There was a frantic, desperate understanding in his gaze. "Move now." He gestured wildly for us to go, to use the creature's own noise to mask our escape. Lena and I grabbed Ben, half dragging, half carrying him along the ledge. Our silent discipline was gone, replaced by a clumsy, stumbling race against time. The sound of our boots on the wet rock, the grunts of exertion, were all swallowed by the rhythmic splashing of the aquatic listener as it closed in. The ledge ended at a steep, upward-sloping scree of loose rock. It was our only way out of the chamber. "Go, climb!" Jax hissed, giving me a powerful shove towards the slope. He turned back, his headlamp beam fixed on the creature, now pulling itself onto the ledge, water streaming from its pale, bloated form. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall. Lena and I scrambled up the scree slope, pulling a groaning Ben with us. Every step sent a shower of small rocks tumbling down. It was a cascade of noise. more listeners, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from the darkness at the far end of the cavern, their chittering rising in pitch and volume. Jax stood his ground at the bottom of the slope, his climbing axe held ready. He was buying us time. The giant aquatic listener lunged at him. Jax met the charge, swinging his axe, but the creature was too big, too powerful. It swatted him aside like a fly, sending him crashing against the cavern wall. His headlamp flickered and went out. "Jax!" Lena screamed. The sound of her voice, a clear, high-pitched beacon, drew the attention of every listener in the cavern. They all turned, their eyeless faces locking onto her position on the slope. Jax, lying in the darkness. "Let out a pay and run!" It was a selfless, suicidal act. He had given them a new, louder target. The swarm of creatures ignored us and flowed towards the sound of his voice. I saw a dozen pale shapes converge on the spot where he had fallen. Lena was frozen, her face a mask of horror. I grabbed her arm and pulled hard. "He put us this chance, Lena! We can't waste it! We have to go!" We clawed our way to the top of the scree slope, dragging Ben, and plunged into another narrow tunnel. Behind us, the cavern was filled with a chorus of horrific shrieks and wet, tearing sounds. We didn't look back. We just ran, stumbling through the darkness, tears streaming down our faces. The hero of our expedition, the Rock, the man who had held us all together, was gone, and we had left him behind. Now we were three, lost, broken, and running on the fumes of adrenaline and grief. We found a small, defensible alcove and collapsed. Ben was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, and his skin was clammy. I tore a strip of fabric from my undershirt and, working by the dim glow of Lena's failing headlamp, I inspected his wound. It was deep, and the flesh around it was turning a dark, ugly purple. Sepsis was setting in. "We can't save him," Lena whispered, her voice hollow. "Not down here." She was right. He needed antibiotics, a sterile environment, a surgeon. We had none of that. We had darkness and silence. Ben's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "The fungi," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The bioluminescence. It's not random. It's their writing, their language." I stared at him. He was delirious. "No, look," he insisted, trying to point with his good arm. "The patterns, they pulse. Frequencies, it's how they see. How the city lives. We're in a living thing. Aris." His eyes closed. His breathing became a shallow, rattling sigh. A few minutes later, it stopped. Ben, the gentle heart of our team, was gone. He died not in terror, but in a final moment of scientific wonder. Lena and I sat with him in the dark, in the silence. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. 2 days ago, we were on the verge of the greatest discovery in history. Now, we were just the last 2 survivors of a doomed expedition, waiting for our batteries to die, you waiting for the silence to claim us. Despair is a cold, heavy blanket. It saps your strength, your will, your hope. We sat there for hours. Lena's headlamp finally died. plunging us into absolute blackness. My own was on its last legs, the beam a pathetic, flickering yellow. I kept it off, saving the last dregs of power. This is it, isn't it? Lena's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, from the darkness beside me. We're going to die here. I don't know, I said, my own voice hoarse. They're going to find us eventually, she said. We'll get thirsty. We'll have to move. We'll make a sound. She was right. It was inevitable. A cough, a stumble, a falling rock. In this world, life was noise, and noise was death. And that's when the idea came. A terrible, desperate, insane idea. It was born from Lena's words, from the memory of Jax's sacrifice. We couldn't beat them with silence. We were human. We were noisy. So what if we used it? What if we used sound as a weapon? I fumbled in the dark, my fingers finding Lena's shoulder. Lena, your gear, the drone. What's its battery status? It did, she said. Everything's dead. No, not the drone itself, I whispered, the idea taking shape. The controller. The handheld unit. Minimal power, she said. Why? Does it have a speaker? A locator function. A loud one. I could feel her shift in the darkness. It has a fine drone feature. Emits a high-frequency, multi-directional ping. Very, very loud. It's designed to be heard from half a kilometer away through solid rock. Though hope, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, sparked in my chest. A tiny, fragile flame. Here's the plan, I whispered, my lips close to her ear. We find a way up, a shaft, a chimney, anything. We get as far away as we can, and then one of us sets off that beacon. It will draw every single one of them to it. It will be the loudest thing this cave has ever heard. It will give the other person a window, a chance to climb. Lena was silent for a long time. I could hear her quiet, shaky breathing. One of us, she repeated softly. It's a suicide mission. It's a chance, I countered. It's the only one we have. We left Ben's body in the alcove. We said no words. There were no words left. We simply touched his shoulder, a final, silent farewell, and moved on. Our search for an exit was methodical, fueled by our desperate plan. We used the last few minutes of my headlamp's power in short, 1-second bursts to navigate. We found it, finally. A vertical shaft, almost perfectly circular, ascending into the darkness. It was too smooth to be natural. It had to be one of the city's ventilation shafts, just as I had hoped. It was our way out. The shaft was narrow, requiring a chimney climb. Back against one wall, feet against the other. It would be slow, exhausting, and excruciatingly loud. We couldn't climb it without making noise. One of us had to create the diversion. We stood at the bottom of the shaft, the darkness of physical presence around us. This was the moment of decision. I'll do it, Lena said, her voice firm. No, I said immediately. It was my expedition, my responsibility. You don't be a fool, Aris, she snapped, a spark of her old fire returning. You're the leader. You're the one who can tell the story, who can warn them. If I do it, I die a techie who made a mistake. If you do it, the knowledge dies with you. Silos, the listeners, all of it. Your life has more value now. That's just the cold, hard math. She was right. It was a horrible, pragmatic truth. But I couldn't accept it. I can't let you do that, Lena. She fumbled in the dark, and her hand found mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You're not letting me. I'm choosing. It's the last real choice I have. Let me make it. She pressed the drone controller into my hand. There's a timer function. You can set it for up to 10 minutes. Set it, leave it, and climb. She then did something that broke my heart. She unclipped her helmet. I won't need this, she whispered. Her face illuminated for a brief, final moment as I checked the controller's screen was pale and grim. But her eyes were steady. She was terrified, but she was resolute. I set the timer for 10 minutes, the longest 10 minutes of my life. I placed the small, dark box on the floor, about 30 meters from the base of the shaft. Goodbye, Aris, Lena whispered from the darkness. Goodbye, Lena, I choked out. I didn't hear her move away. She just melted into the silence. She was going to find her own place to wait, to meet the end on her own terms. I turned to the shaft and began to climb. Every movement was an agony of noise. The scrape of my clothes on the rock, the harsh sound of my own breathing, the grunts of exertion I couldn't suppress. I climbed with a frantic, desperate energy, my mind counting down the seconds. My muscles burned, my lungs felt ready to burst, but I couldn't stop. I had to get as high as possible. The 10 minutes were almost up. I was perhaps 40 meters up the shaft when it happened. The sound that erupted from below was indescribable. It was a piercing, multitonal shriek that drilled into my ears and vibrated through the rock itself. It was the sound of pure, concentrated technology unleashed in a world of ancient biology. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And the listeners answered. From every tunnel, every crevice, every dark corner of the dead city, they responded. A wave of sound rose up the shaft, a chorus of thousands of shrieks, a cacophony of rage and pain and predatory hunger. It was the sound of a hive being kicked, the sound of a tomb being violated, and then I heard them climbing. A storm of clicking, scraping claws coming up the shaft below me. They were a tide of pale bodies, drawn inexorably towards the source of the sound, and I was in their path. I climbed faster, my fingers raw, my body screaming in protest. The noise from below was deafening. A wall of shrieking horror that threatened to overwhelm my senses. They were getting closer. I could hear the wet slap of their feet on the rock just a few meters below me. Then, just as the first clawed hand reached for my boot, the beacon below cut out. The 10 minutes were up. Silence. Abrupt, absolute, shocking silence. The listeners faltered. Their shrieks died in their throats. They stopped climbing, confused. Their entire world, which a moment ago had been filled with a single, overwhelming stimulus, was now void. They clung to the walls of the shaft, their fan-like ears twitching, trying to find a new sound, a new target, and they heard one. The sound of my heart hammering against my ribs, the sound of my ragged, terrified breathing. I held my breath, flattening myself against the rock. But it was too late. They had me. A low chitter started up from the creature just below me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. And then, from far below, a new sound. A single human voice, screaming in defiance. "Hey, why? You move, bastards! OVR!" It was Lena. She hadn't hidden. She hadn't waited for a quiet end. She had waited for the beacon to die. She had waited for them to find me, and then she gave them a new target. She sacrificed herself, not just to the plan, but for me specifically. The listeners shrieked in unison and reversed course. A waterfall of pale bodies scrambling back down the shaft towards her voice. Her screams were cut short by a wave of wet, tearing sounds. I didn't wait. I didn't mourn. I just climbed. I climbed until my muscles gave out, until my mind was a numb blank of grief and exhaustion. I climbed out of the city of silos. I climbed out of the realm of the listeners. I eventually emerged into a section of the cave I recognized, a passage we had mapped on our way down. I was above them. I was safe from them, but I was not safe. The journey to the surface took another 4 days. I had no food, no light, and only a few sips of water left. I climbed in total darkness, my hands and memory my only guides. I moved like a zombie, driven by a single, primal instinct to reach the sun. I was haunted by the silence, a silence that was now filled with the ghosts of my friends. I heard Jax's gruff advice, Ben's quiet wonder, Marco's laugh, Lena's final, defiant scream. When I finally saw it, I thought I was hallucinating. A faint, gray light in the distance, the entrance. I crawled the last 100 meters. I pulled my broken body out of the mouth of the abyssal maw and collapsed onto the rocky ground. The morning sun hitting my face, I wept. I wept for the light, for the air, for the world I had thought I'd never see again. And I wept for the 4 friends I had left behind in the dark. The rescue team found me hours later, dehydrated, emaciated, and half-met. The official story is that there was a catastrophic geological event, a cavern. My team was lost. I was the sole, miraculous survivor. They don't know the truth. No one does. The world celebrates the Tartarus expedition for breaking the depth record, a record I hold in my name alone. They call me a hero, a survivor. They don't know that the greatest discovery in human history lies miles beneath their feet, guarded by blind, deathless things that hunt by sound. They don't know the price of that record. I can't tell them. To tell them would be to invite a new kind of expedition, a military one. They would go down there with weapons and bombs, and they would wake the city. And I have no doubt that the listeners, if unleashed upon our noisy, clamoring world, would be a plague beyond our comprehension. Silos is a tomb that must never be opened again. Its secret must be kept. I no longer seek out the quiet places. I live in the city now, where there is always noise, always a distraction. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the traffic dies down and the world grows still, I can hear it. A faint, wet, clicking sound just at the edge of my hearing. And I remember that silence has a sound, and it is waiting.